Welcome to the Age to Come webcast. This is Biblical Doctrine for the Church in this age. I'm Dave Wilson, here as always with Pernell Gibson and Josh Howard. And today we are on episode 23. This is kind of we could call it a season 2, because we've been going for a year now.
We're going to call it season 2.
We're going to call it season 2.
Yeah.
And we haven't done one of these in like a month, so...
Season 2 sounds way more impressive than just the 23rd episode. You know, we made it 2 seasons.
2 seasons.
Which is commendable.
Episode 23 for 2023.
That's right.
Look at you.
That's beautiful. That's
it.
beautiful. Well, today we are sure to get 1 million views on this one. We're talking about sexual ethics. I know the topic that everyone wants to hear about in 2023. So,
right. Non-controversial.
Yeah, non-controversial. It'll be smooth and good, and everybody's going to love it.
Yep. No, but I mean, honestly, it's something that we need to talk about. Mm-hmm. And as Christians, like, that's one of the things that we want to do is not just talk about the things that are comfortable or convenient, but the things that need to be discussed. And, you know, Dave, you're the one that kind of floated this idea, and I think it's one that Christians need to engage in. Like, if we were to put out the ones that need to be addressed and worked through, for a lot of Christians, we don't really delve much into those topics. And I know we're going to get into some of those examples here.
Yeah, and I think with this topic too, like, our tendency as the church is to be very reactionary,
right?
In terms of, okay, well, this is what the culture's doing, so here's how we need to push back. But we really need to give, I think, a positive view of what are biblical Christian sexual ethics. And if we can have a good grasp on those, you know, we know how to react, but not only know how to react, but to, again, just be proactive in our thinking and things like that. You know, this is we've talked about doing this topic for a while now, but it's just, you know, finally happening. But you know, I think that it's almost sexual ethics, I think, is probably one of the primary formal reasons why you see a lot of young people leaving the church. It's not so much a matter of they're leaving the church because they don't think Christianity is true or something like that, but they're leaving the church because they don't want to be told what to do sexually. Right. So that's kind of their underlying thing. I know there was a couple years ago, there was a fairly famous apologist whose daughter left the church after, you know, knowing intellectually all these things, but, you know, and she was asked about it in an interview, and she basically said, well, I, you know, wanted to sleep with my boyfriend. And
doesn't that say a lot, though? I mean, if you think about it, I guess I never really thought about that before, as far as that being the primary or one of the primary reasons why a lot of younger people leave the churches. Like, if that's your focus, and so you're willing to sacrifice God for that, I mean, I think it says something as to where a generation is.
Yeah,
you know,
both what they value and also what society is pushing as, like, this is a primary issue. Yeah,
right.
I just saw, and I cannot recall where it was from. But anyway, there just recently they did a study on that, and it was like, I can't remember the number, but it was like 80 or 90%, I want to say, when they were doing exit surveys, essentially, of deconstructing, you know, millennials and stuff like that, or Gen Xers or whatever. And then people were leaving the church, not Gen Xers, but yeah, young people that were leaving the church, and they were asking them. It was a super high number, and that was one of the primary reasons was, and I think it was phrased, the church's stance toward LGBTQ people, or the church's stance toward my LGBTQ friends, something along those lines. But it's sexual ethics is what we're talking about.
And think about this too, like, just showing how far. I guess I'll say how far Christianity has been watered down, because, like, in Scripture, you have Jesus saying that people made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom. Not advocating to make yourself a eunuch, but I'm just saying, like, to go to that length for the kingdom of God. And then now it's like, okay, I'm going to give up God because I can't sleep with my boyfriend or sleep with my girlfriend, like that type of thing.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
That's absolutely terrible.
It is. It's crazy just to think of kind of where we are as a society. But yeah, so we're going to be arguing, I think, in this that that the biblical view is actually something that's better, just objectively better. It's something that actually promotes human flourishing. And it's something that I think, you know, when you look at just various scientific studies and methods and things like that, I think you can argue objectively that the biblical view is better for human flourishing than the current secular ethic.
And the only true way of Christian flourishing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? That would be the, like, kind of presuppositional pushback against a lot of the classical apologists will say it is better to believe in God than X, or it is better to pursue God than X. And I know that's not what you're saying, but, like, you know what I mean? That perspective. And I think you could say, yes, that's true, but we could also push that further and say this is the only true way you're going to flourish.
Yes.
So for Christians, I think there's, and you were mentioning this a second ago, Dave, and I want to mention it before we move on, but there's a positive and a negative that's associated with sexual ethics, right? People leaving the church, they're going to cite the negative. They say, I cannot, sleep with my boyfriend before marriage, or I cannot affirm a so-called homosexual union, or whatever it might be. So, like, there's the negative. We as Christians have to affirm both the positive and the negative. God says, you shall not do X. Here's the prohibition. God also says, you shall do Y. So there's a positive, here's how to behave sexually. We need to affirm that. And there's a negative, and we as Christians can't sacrifice either.
Right.
We can't just say it's all about the positive, we're going to show you a better way, without putting in the negative. But at the same time, we don't want to just put out the negative and act as if there's no positive dimension to sexual ethics for the Christian.
Right.
Which is, I think, probably if we were looking at one or the other, that's probably where Christians have tended more toward, is too much of the thou shalt nots, which yes and amen.
Right. Here's the list of things you can't
do.
Yeah.
And like commending them for pointing out but then make sure to put the positive in there too. And I think a lot of Christians, maybe it's just too uncomfortable.
And I think that's what kind of falls into that whole just being reactionary. You fall into the you can't or shouldn't do this, as opposed to elaborating on what is fine. According to what God has said.
What is fine.
Or not only fine, but what is good.
Yeah, right.
What is good. Yeah.
We're going to make a pamphlet.
Fine.
What is fine with sexual ethics? It's okay.
Cool. So I guess with that in mind, I mean, how do we want to move forward in terms of this episode? Do we want to start with sort of, let's see, here's the secular view, or do we want to kind of present our view and then look at the secular view in light of that? What do you guys want to do?
I'm a negative type personality sometimes, so I'd like to start with just the negative view of like what was the false view being presented to our young people. I think we can affirm from the outset, God made us as, I don't want to say sexual creatures because that makes it sound like we're just dominated by sexual impulses, but you know what I mean. Yeah. God made us as sexual beings.
Right.
Yes.
Sex is not something, and sexual impulses and all the things involved in that, those aren't evil.
Right.
Your wedding night is not something for you to have, a shameful, like...
You shouldn't have to repent after
that. Right. That's a good thing. God's made us in that regard. But I think it'd be good, if we could just walk through, like, but why is that, like, how's that been twisted, essentially? How is that being perverted by the world?
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess with the secular view, and again, we're broadly labeling it the secular view. Obviously, there's a lot of variety there that you can be, but sure. I think a lot of times, really, when we think about this, probably the ideal thing for us to do would be to kind of go back to the sexual revolution that started in the 60s, because really that's sort of the trajectory that we're on. But I think a lot of people, when they think about the sexual revolution, they think about just sort of a push for looser boundaries. So they would say, sort of, what we might label like a 1950s sort of a, more wholesome Christian sexual ethic is too restrictive. So, we just need to relax those things a little bit. Let's maybe just move the boundary back. But I think when you actually look at a lot of the philosophy of the sexual revolution, a lot of things that led up to that, really it's a push. It's almost like iconoclastic, like it's almost against the very idea of standards.
Yes.
And I think we've seen that play out within the last 15, 20 years, just most recently with sort of the push for the transgender movement, where they're even defying the categories of gender and things like that. But then before that, kind of the LG and the B portion of things, it's kind of the step before that. And but yeah, so...
And I think when you're talking about the 60s and the sexual revolution, and there's been a lot of really good books, articles, podcasts, other things that have come out on that. So I would commend those things to you. But just thinking of the way that's morphed, a lot of it to me was also, it seems like a rejection of authority. So you mentioned iconoclastic tendencies, but it's not just the fact of we want to be free. So there's that was the picture painted, was like, here's the poor bedraggled housewife home vacuuming the floor and tending to the children while the husband's off gallivanting and having this great lifestyle. That's the way in the 60s the feminist movement would have pushed that ideal and said, liberate yourselves from these things. Right. But ultimately, it was a rejection of authority. Liberate yourself from authority, period.
Right.
So it starts with that small, kind of small example of, I'm going to liberate myself from that wicked husband who's just trying to keep me home making him pie or sandwiches. But then it turned into, I'm gonna also liberate myself of the need to have children. I'm gonna start taking birth control, and again, I'm not going down a whole road there, but I'm saying it was a liberation of, I don't want those things, and eventually that leads to, because it's ultimately symptomatic of, a rejection of God's authority.
Yeah.
So how dare you stodgy old church filled with aged men who are trying to hold me down, how dare you tell me that the Bible says X? And I think that bears out in a lot of the conversations that we have about sexual ethics, is even when it comes with the floundering Christian, or the Christian who's having kind of crisis of conscience with those issues like we talked about at the beginning, that Christian that's really struggling with their faith, it typically has very little to do with the Bible. And it typically has very much to do with, how dare anyone tell me what to do?
Right.
I'm the captain of my own ship in these regards.
Yep, it's rooted in just the desire for autonomy.
Right.
I think.
I was gonna elaborate on something, but I guess I don't really know how to say it. But what you said, Josh, is pretty much what I was thinking. Just when you were, Dave, when you were talking about like the 1950s, I was thinking, okay, like what during that time frame would they have been really pushing back against? And I'm not even talking about like the things like that. I don't even know how to say it, like the things that people like to do, you know, within like in their marriage bed or whatever. I'm not even thinking about that, like that type of stuff, but like, what are they pushing back on? And then, so as you were talking, the only thing that I could think of is like, oh, well, they're ultimately pushing back against God's authority. Ultimately.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever will fall into that category, because it's the same type of thing that we see now. I mean, we still have, you know, Christians saying, okay, this is what God has said in regards to, you know, male and female and marriage, and, you know, how the confines of like sex and everything. We still have those things, and you still have people pushing back against that while citing all of these other things, but ultimately it comes back to just that.
Yep.
You know, what God has said.
So
you know.
I know I've recommended it before, but Carl Trueman's book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, and then the follow-up. What was the follow-up?
Strange New World.
Thank you. Yeah, Strange New World. I read both. Strange New World was definitely easier. Like, it's the condensed version, so I commend both. But like, it's
the one that's not like 600 pages.
Yeah, it's still like 400 pages or something. It's only like 200 and something.
Yeah,
pages.
no, it's pretty
that
short.
one's a good
It's pretty
one.
short. Yeah, that's probably the one that I would recommend to most people.
Yeah, Strange New World, Carl Trueman. That's a great walkthrough. Man, if you can read the full version, though, it gives you so much of the, like, you feel how this has kind of progressed. But also one that was just on my mind was one through Canon Press. It was on Margaret Sanger, so it was kind of keyed in on how the abortion industry has taken off in the United States. I think it was called Angel of Death, was the biography of Margaret Sanger that they wrote. But anyway, it was very illuminating as far as like you were talking about, Pernell, that rejection of God, and also the fact that those who reject God, like, these things are not disconnected. So it serves people's interests for you to be sexually promiscuous, consuming birth control, aborting your children, running from marriage, working because the family home has been destroyed, and so all the things that flow from that, people benefit from those things. And again, that's not to make a whole big conspiracy thing about it, but it is to say that it's not for no reason that there are many entities within Western society that are constantly goading people into this sexual promiscuity and a rejection of biblical sexual ethics. They benefit.
Definitely.
Yep, 100%. So I guess just to continue on the secular view a little bit. So I would say, like we've already mentioned, it's, I think, very much rooted in human autonomy. The idea just the desire to say, okay, I don't care about your authority. I want to do what I want to do. And I would say that, sorry. I would say that, cell phone in the background. I would say that two of the kind of modern maybe ways that we can summarize this are, one is the view that as long as it's between consenting adults, it's fine. So I think if you were to ask most secular people, what is your view in terms of, okay, well, what is okay, what is not okay sexually? I think that's probably the number one answer you would get, is as long as it's consensual and between adults, it's fine. And then, I guess the other thing would just be, if I like it, it's good.
Yeah.
I almost think that those are, like, I don't know how you can summarize it any more broadly than I guess with those two.
And we can recognize, like, there's something endemic to fallen human nature in this. So, we just talked about, like, Western culture, and we talked about all the, the impulses that go into, to back up from that. Samson wandered around and found some Philistine girl who looked good to him. His words, not mine. She looks good to me, and like he went and snatched her. You can have sexual promiscuity just based on kind of that fallen human nature of like, I'm gonna do me. I'm gonna do what feels good to me, like Dave was pointing out.
One of the things that I just in line with what you were saying, that I kind of watched play out in society, mainly when I became more aware of, I just say the entertainment industry as a whole, is like a saying that maybe it was more of a philosophy of Aleister Crowley, the whole do what thou wilt. And then the more like I started to look into that and kind of really considered what he was talking about there, and then I saw it everywhere. I mean, I would actually see it even quoted, in a lot of songs and different variations of it, as far as it being elaborated upon within movies, and you just see it play out even more in a culture over time.
Yep.
It's.
And I see like how many movies and TV shows is that the underlying theme too.
Definitely. Definitely.
So I think we're subconsciously taking that in.
Yeah.
That is essentially the ethic and the, I guess, really the worldview that's being pushed onto our kids through, education and media and social media and all that kind of thing.
And Aleister Crowley, I mean, not to go too far into this, but he was like a big proponent of something called sex magic.
Okay, yeah.
And with, again, a lot of the kind of stuff that you see promoted in entertainment and music, it falls right into the kind of stuff that he was teaching. He was very much into the occult, this particular character, but yeah.
Yeah, what sex magic?
Yeah.
I would assume, a little bit of occult in it. I know, Dave, you made notes about, the dichotomous perspective here.
Yeah.
Or, the dichotomy there. So I was thinking of two things, and help me walk through this, but I was thinking of two things. Number one, you do have certain impulses within our society, like Freud was, one of the most famous, Sigmund Freud, who essentially said like our entire self-realization is born through sexual experience and experimentation. So you've got that, but then you also have that dichotomy, and this is where this is what I hear from people a lot of times is, well, it wasn't really about me, it was just kind of like, oh, it's just my body, like I was just connecting with them physically, we're physical creatures, that type of thing. It's a dichotomous, and what we mean by dichotomous is essentially separating body from soul in some form or fashion. People don't think of that. They don't use the word dichotomy, but that's the way they describe it, is like, oh, well, it was just a physical encounter.
Yeah.
As if that could ever happen for a person that God has made body and soul. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's very prevalent with the hookup culture in our society.
And that's the fundamental assumption that that people are going to make there. Again, most people aren't going to say, oh, well, I believe in a body-spirit dichotomy. But, to kind of use the terms that Francis Schaeffer I guess created or coined or something, but sort of the idea of the upper story and the lower story. And it goes back to kind of the idea of like the ghost in the machine, where the idea is, okay, who I am really is sort of who I am psychologically. Like this is who I am up here, and this is my body. My body is kind of a tool. Like it's something that's separate from me, and this is I guess just one of those things that again, I think this really underlies a lot of this. So we would say, like for, I think like pornography is a really good example of that, because in that, okay, this isn't a person, this is a body. And that's what you are. And with hookup culture, it's the same thing. It's like, okay, I don't really care about you as a person. I just want to use your body in a way that pleases me.
Right.
So I'm,
and
just
as long
sort
as
of,
you're consenting, it's
and as long as you're consenting, you can use my body this way, and we'll be good to go. But again, it's disconnecting the body from the person. And this is also one of those things, we've talked about abortion in the past too, but this is also, people, if you look at the arguments for and against abortion, people aren't really arguing anymore whether or not it's human, whether or not it's living. The science is incredibly clear. A fetus is, fully alive, fully human. But what they're saying is, well, it is alive and human, but it's not really a person. Right. So the idea is, until it has this conscious, self, that's just a body. That's just medical waste or whatever.
I think that is the standard of the sexual ethic of our culture is consent, like you pointed out, Pernell. Like, so it's I wrote down in the notes, my body, my choice. That's kind of the slogan, right? Like if you were to think, but I've seen I've seen a couple of guys. I think Ray Comfort might have even done some of these, but like those interview videos, the person on the street type thing, and they'll ask people like, is there such things as right and wrong things within sexual conduct? And a lot of times people will be hesitant to say anything's wrong, but then they'll kind of push it and say like, is rape wrong? Like a forcible rape? They'd be like, oh yeah, that's wrong. Why? And then you get down to it, and it really comes down to, oh well, it's just consent.
Right. Yeah, right. Someone didn't want that. So
why is pedophilia wrong? Consent. Why is rape wrong? Consent. That's a super dangerous, obviously, super dangerous and a super untenable, shifting standard of truth. But that's where our society has kind of drawn the line of what is good and what is not.
Right.
If two people consent to it, it might as well be good. A lot of that, I think this is sort of endemic to a lot of American thought. So Thomas Jefferson had this famous quote. He said something's okay if it neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg.
Yeah.
And essentially the thing there being like, oh, Dave's doing something crazy, Pernell's doing something crazy. Well, if it neither picks my pocket, doesn't affect me negatively, nor breaks my leg, harms me, well, that's fine. Right. We can all do as we choose, which is just a radically, I say it's American because, America's all about pulling up your bootstraps.
Yep.
Me, I'm an island to myself. But man, that's dangerous when it comes to sexual ethics or biblical values.
Oh, yeah. Something, just going back a little bit to that whole body-person dichotomy piece, it makes me think about something that I used to say to my friends a lot. It is something that I, thankfully, I kind of realized this early on, is that, what you do in that arena with your body when it comes to sex, like sex still does, I'd say, some of the things that God designed it to do, even outside of marriage. Like one of the things I want to kind of focus on is it's designed to bring people closer together.
Yeah.
So many times I see people who are promiscuous, both guys and girls, they get connected in that way with the wrong people or the wrong person, and it affects them long term. And you can't get the person out of your head. They have this control over you in a lot of occasions, and I don't think that that's for some arbitrary reason disconnected from the fact that you've been intimate with this person.
Yep, absolutely. When you look at like the biochemical response of people and things like that, and even to paraphrase an article from Glamour, which was kind of interesting coming from Glamour, but they said in a nutshell, again, this is a paraphrase, they say, well, you may intend on just having casual sex, but your body may trump that desire. Right. So in other words, okay, this is fully my intent here, but your body is doing something else.
Right.
And
that to me is the perspective of the culture that says anything is permissible. It's so nonsensical because we know it doesn't work.
Right.
Anyone can look around and say like, oh, marriages are crumbling left and right. The nuclear family is being destroyed. Everything that spawns from that is on the rise. We know it's not working, and yet we still try to champion this view. It's nonsensical.
And I guess I can't fully say why we try to champion this view, but one of the things that pops into my mind is that it's that instant gratification that you get when you just do what you want in terms of sex. And what comes after that, it's like, if you're not feeling the effects of it right then and there, it's like this far off distant thing that you might still somehow be able to avoid.
Yep.
Even though you can see the after effects, it's like, oh man, look at all these dead bodies behind. But what's happening right now is pleasure. Yeah. And so therefore, forget all that other stuff.
Yeah. No, we're absent God, and we need to get into the Christian view here because I'm getting depressed. But no, absent God, we're all going to be self-destructive. Sin is destructive.
Yep.
So why would somebody binge drink themselves through the night, knowing they're going to wake up with a hangover and probably harm their liver? Because there's instant gratification. Right. It's self-destructive. Yep. But let's move in.
Yeah.
Dave, walk us into what is the Christian view then?
Well, and I would say the Christian view most fundamentally is that which is based on God's law, which is based on God's nature. Right. So you have sort of the pinnacle of the secular view is it's based on us. It's our autonomy, whatever we like, whatever we want, that sort of thing. But then the Christian view is, of course, going to be based on what God has revealed. And like you said early on, God has created us, among other things, to be sexual beings. Again, not in the sense that that's our primary and main function is to function function as, sexual beings, but God has created us that way. He's created us with those desires. God has given us marriage and said, this is good. This is the way that you are going to flourish. This is the way you're going to glorify me. Right. This is the proper context for sex. Sex is going to, help glue the marriage together and and just promote human flourishing and the glory of God. Right. And essentially anything outside of that is going to be in the category of sin, whether we're talking about fornication or homosexuality or anything like that.
Yeah, I'm glad you framed it in the context of God's law, because I think that's key. Like what we're telling people is not the fact that there's a law concerning sex. We're just telling them what the proper law concerning sex is.
Yeah.
Everybody has a law concerning sex, or sexual ethics, I should say. It's just whether that is a man-made law, which is as flimsy and changing as men are, or is it God's eternal law that we can point to and say God's the one that made this, therefore he's the one that knows how it functions best and prescribes its parameters.
Yeah, it's like when you when the creator says something should be used a certain kind of way, the creator of the thing, you use like this microphone, you use it to be able to hear your voice through whatever particular program. If I decide to use this microphone as a hammer, right, that's not the best way to use the microphone.
So just on a practical
scale.
That thinking though, Pernell, you're old fashioned, because that thinking you're ascribing an authority to that situation. What do? We have a brand new iPhone. We skip through all the agreements. We don't read them, and you don't either, right? We skip through the agreements, and then what do? I
don't have an iPhone.
Then we jail. Well, yeah. Get out of here. So we skip through all the agreements, and then we jailbreak the phone so we can put all the apps on there. Like we are very accustomed to setting our own way in this world. As a society.
And the thing with that too, I mean, I'm mainly thinking about Christians who might fall into these traps of thinking this way. When you think of God, you have to put him in his proper place. So if you have God, the creator of all things, who's sovereign over all things, saying this is what you must do.
Right. Yeah.
Like, what wiggle room? Why did you try to find loopholes? Like, I mean, it's God.
Right.
And I think that's really what I'm trying to get people to understand, and what I've always tried to get people to understand when having these type of conversations. And there's freedom and pleasure in doing things the way he says to do things.
Right.
Yeah. But people have been hoodwinked and bamboozled into other things.
Bamboozled.
I love it.
Amen. No, I mean, that's the whole tragedy of the fall. Is God made something good, and then it was twisted and perverted in the fall because our desires and passions are twisted and perverted. We have a soul problem. We have or maybe not soul, a nature problem. We could say, right? Like our nature has a problem. We want the things we know are going to destroy us, and we want to reject God's good plan. So when you think of things, all the manifestations of sexual impulse in this world that are sinful, like we could think of, extramarital affairs, or we could think of pornography, which is just streaming through literally every screen we have now, or you could think of just good old fashioned lust, right? Like entertaining,
old-fashioned lust.
Right? Like the old fashioned pornography. I see somebody and I entertain sinful thoughts in my head. Right. When you think of those things, we so oftentimes say, "Oh, well, I'm feeling this thing, ergo it must be good." No, you're feeling something that your nature has taken something good that God gave you and perverted it.
Yeah.
I don't expect, I'm sorry, I'll go right to you. I was going to say like a 15, 16-year-old boy, not to get too like graphic or anything, I fully expect him to be feeling things, right? Somebody that's, or a boy that's going through puberty, God has given certain natural impulses that God has designed then to spur him to pursue a woman and to pursue marriage and to pursue procreation and fellowship with that woman, all of the things that are good and God honoring. Yet we will take that and say, oh, he's into pornography every single day. Well, that's just him following his desires. Like God gave him those desires.
Right.
God didn't give him those desires for that.
Right.
For something far better. Those desires will destroy him. God, following it God's way, that'll lead to flourishing.
Yes.
What were you saying though?
Well, that actually segues perfectly into the last thing that you were just saying. Like I remember when I was like in my late teens having a conversation with a mentor of mine, and I was feeling guilty for like, being curious about looking at like pornography and stuff like that. And because, here in America too, I mean, especially, well, just common circles amongst, men and younger boys or whatever, it's common to look at that type of thing.
Yeah.
You don't have a lot of people, at least during our time frames, maybe even worse now, pushing back against that type of thing. But I remember talking to a mentor of mine about it because I was feeling guilty. And I was like, I don't really think I should look at this kind of stuff. And then you have older men saying, okay, well, if you want to know this, you look at this, and like that type of thing. And I remember saying, I don't think it's a good thing to look at that. And the mentor of mine, who also happened to be, in the church, was like, well, God understands, and, just kind of like brush it off. And I remember I read to him, because it was me talking to myself, but I was also saying this to him, is Matthew 5:27-28, when Jesus said, you have heard it was said, you shall not commit adultery, but I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart.
Right.
And I remember I said that to him, and I was like, just the fact that Jesus is saying that, I mean, that has to mean that, we should not do that.
Right.
I was like, because that's essentially what you're doing when you look at certain movies and look at certain magazines and everything.
You're committing adultery.
You're committing
in your heart.
Yeah. And the pushback that I received from that is like, well, but he understands, but I was like, but he said it. So that means that, why would he basically say you shouldn't do a thing if we're just incapable of doing it?
Right.
And that's kind of what started me really paying more attention to this type of thing. Even it was a weird spot to be in, considering I was like 18 and I'm talking to someone who's like in their late 20s, and this person is like in the church, but I was like, I know something is wrong with this, but this person is telling me, well, it's normal, but I'm like, but it doesn't feel normal.
Right. Yep. Yep, it's crazy. On that, and speaking of like the younger generations, there was a study that came out a while back that I think it was Gen Zers that viewing of pornography as no more or worse morally than not recycling. And
wow.
Yeah. I mean, to show just to give a barometer of where we are as a culture.
Yeah.
That's crazy because that will destroy you.
Yeah. Seriously. Give you a lot of false perceptions.
And you've got there's always the two ditches, right, with any of these things. So you've got on the one hand the Christian that'll say, oh, those are just desires that you have, you're a man, boys will be boys, whatever those. And I know we're using a lot of boy language, but there's three guys here, and I know boys a lot better than I know girls because I was one, but or am one. That sounds weird, doesn't it? In our day and age. But just thinking about that, so you got like the whole boys will be boys crowd. On the flip side, you have the crowd, and I think this is equally dangerous and possibly equally damaging, is the crowd of the boy going through puberty comes to his father and says, hey, Dad, I'm feeling these desires. And he says, well, you better just gulp hard and swallow those down. Never think about that again.
Right.
And scares the snot like it's something evil. And I know this is kind of graphic, but like there's something evil with his arousal toward females.
Right.
As opposed to saying, hey, that's a good God honoring, and I know that's an awkward conversation to have with your son. I get it. I've got sons.
Better than the alternative.
Right. Hey, that's a good thing, but don't misdirect it.
Right.
Same thing as anything else in life. Like food's good. Probably shouldn't overeat till you're vomiting and damage yourself. That's a good thing. But let me tell you now, have you thought about praying for your wife?
Right.
That you have not even met yet? Have you thought about what sort of husband and man you want to grow up to be? Direct that thinking, as opposed to just acting as if it is in itself sinful. Something which God has kind of put in that boy to spur him.
Definitely.
As he grows.
Yeah.
That was good.
Amen.
Oh, well, that, amen.
I was going to say, just the passage that Pernell brought up where Jesus is connecting adultery and lust is kind of the same thing. I think that's important to understand too. So there's kind of a chain of things that are all essentially the same sin. So obviously adultery is the physical, the physical act of it. But I mean, when we think about it, anything that involves lust, for someone other than your spouse is that sin of adultery.
Yeah.
So whether that's, fornication or pornography or anything like that, like those all, biblically are in the same bucket. And even the word that we get for pornography comes from a Greek word that Jesus used as a prohibition. Porneo was basically the Greek term for that act. And again, it's a blanket term. It includes, prostitution and various other things like that. But in terms of the prohibition, because, sometimes I think a lot of times with like what Pernell said earlier, we tend to be really legalistic when we're looking for ways out of things. So like for someone unmarried saying, oh, well, I'm not, committing adultery. I'm just sleeping with my, sleeping around or whatever. But it's like, neither of us are married, so it's not really adultery. But you don't get that excuse.
And so much of this, I feel like if you're the Christian, you're looking to kind of anchor yourself in like, you know, what is kind of like my home base for this discussion? Where do I anchor myself? I think you have to look to the created order, right? So like, I know you made notes about Genesis 2 in here, Dave, but when we look at the created order, there's a creator who is God and God alone, and then you have everything else, which is creation.
Yep.
Now, humanity is distinct. They bear God's image. They're different and more than creation, the rest of the created order, and yet they're still in that created order, right?
Yeah.
So when you have that created order, you have God, Genesis chapter 1, makes them male and female and pronounces it good. That is the good basis of humanity, and it doesn't change. And then you have Genesis chapter 2, and it goes into a little more detail, and you have the woman being created out of the rib, the flesh of the man, as a help meet, you know, to use that good old KJV language, a help meet to him. She's his partner, she's his helper, and in all the good and biblical ways that term is used. And then you also have them being joined together in marriage. They're united as one flesh. And they're united in one flesh, not only for fellowship, but also for procreation and flourishing. So you've got God's good creational design. The departures from that are always going to lead towards sin, but ultimately also destruction and not flourishing.
Right.
It leads to the undoing of not only society and family, but also of the people involved.
That's so
And
true.
I think that's where, like, if you're the Christian, you're trying to say, man, there's so much though, and people push back on the Greek that Paul uses in 1 Corinthians, and they try to say it's not connected to the Greek in Leviticus 18 and 22, which it is.
Oh, for like homosexuality.
Right. Yeah, you've got
Yeah.
all those different swirling issues, and now with the, you know, all the different letters that are being attached to that phrase, there's a lot you could get lost in. I would just commend Christians, just circle back to, like, God made them male and female, and he joined them together, and he pronounced that good. And if you're looking for further confirmation, Christ refers to that and says this is the created order, and that's a good thing. Stay there and then work outward from there. I think if we keep that at kind of like our jumping off point for every one of these conversations, we're going to be pointing people towards something not only biblical, but something that's going to promote flourishing.
Yeah.
And you know, I was just in regards to Genesis 2, which you were saying, Josh. You know, there's a lot of people, and I'd say some Christians included, that are just afraid to assert those truths just from that, you know, that God made them, you know, male and female, and that, you know, a God created woman for the man. People are afraid, you know, to just assert that. And it makes me think about how the way we got to where we are today, and you kind of outlined some of it, just looking back to the past and seeing how the pendulum swung way in the other direction. And I think a concern of mine is that it's just going to happen again in the other direction. It makes me think of this one guy. I won't say his name, but, you know, a lot of younger guys really like him. He says a lot of things that I think, in terms of his analysis of society, is true. His prescription is horrible of what he says.
I know your term.
Yeah, and
Is it Christian or non-Christian?
He's
None.
so he will say that he believes in God. I think he says he's a Muslim, but he's definitely not Christian.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
I think
I
recently.
have no idea who you're talking about.
I know exactly who you're
You
talking
might know
about
who I'm
now.
talking about.
I know exactly.
This, you know, like, people are kind of clinging to him because he's a loud voice going up against, you know, the authority of
The
today.
titans of society today. Yeah.
But, you know, if things swing in his direction, then things will be, I think, a lot more akin to what actual misogyny is. You know, because people say that, you know, well, you know, the Bible is inherently misogynistic. You know, they'll say that kind of stuff. But if things were to swing in that direction, even though he has some truths and some things that can be found in Scripture, it's still not God's standard, and you'll be left with the same problem.
We got to wrap this
problem.
up with some good old precept. We got to wrap it up with some good old precept because honestly, like, and we probably should commend this on almost every episode we do. Christians, I love Christian humility. I love Christian gentleness. I love when I hear brothers and sisters who have strong convictions and yet they're so measured and careful with their words. Like, I get all of that, right? Just in these issues, it's not your truth.
Right.
Yeah.
That changes this whole dynamic. I would commend to every Christian that hears this video, stop saying I believe X. In regards to this conversation, right? If you're saying something about sexual ethics, you can say not I believe or I think or I.
You're trying
God
to distance yourself.
said,
Exactly.
Period.
Yep.
God said male, female. And you can say it with all the love and gentleness, but God said this thing. This isn't my sexual ethic. This is God's, the God that's the creator God over everything.
Right.
You're just the pointer
Right.
to that truth. That takes all the pride and all the arrogance, or it should, off of you. It takes all the conflict out of that potential. If they have a problem, then they're just having a problem with what God has said.
Exactly.
And that's not your problem.
Right.
Your problem is just to point them to God is God, and He said this, and this is the only way that humanity will flourish. That just to me that has to be the Christian approach with all of these things that are swirling today.
I agree.
Amen. Well, we should probably end it there.
There's so much more I want to talk about.
I know.
Yeah, we got to wrap it up, but man, there's so much more to talk about.
But yeah, I would say both of Carl Trueman's books on that,
Yep.
Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self and Strange New World, are fantastic on that. Again, Strange New World is more brief and concise.
It is.
And then I also want to highly recommend Love Thy Body by Nancy Pearcey. She really goes into depth of kind of what we were talking about earlier with the body person divide. That's also a phenomenal book.
She's a wonderful writer too.
She is amazing. I would love to. I don't think she's created that as a small group study, but I would love to someday. That's one of my goals, is to turn that into like a life group study that we do here, because it's just so rich and good. But anyway, yeah, I think that does it for this episode. Yeah.
Yep. I think that'll do it.
Sounds good. Well, thank you guys again for watching. Like the video, subscribe to our channel, share it, all that good stuff. If you want to email us any questions or suggestions for an episode or something like that, it is the Age to Come Webcast.
You had to look. It's been so long.
But you always say it. I think this is my first time saying.
I was trying to remember how we close. It's been like a month.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so any further questions, reach out to us.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah.
Yep.
We love you. Grace and peace. We'll see you
Join us
soon.
next time. Yep.
Yes, sir.